The post-production process is very wide and involves a lot of people with many different functions in order to achieve the perfect final product. However, this process varies widely depending on the size of the production. In bigger projects, there are many other roles that we will not cover here. For example, the data input and output technician or the pipeline technician. But in smaller ones, many of the roles we mention are condensed in one person. We have decided to split these roles in three categories. Firstly, the assemblers, who put together the footage in order to convey the story and create meaning. Secondly, the visual effects department, who enhance the story. And lastly, the sound department, who craft the soundtrack.
Let us focus on the assemblers. The editor takes all the raw footage and puts it into chronological order. They shape the project story alongside the director, ensuring all the important information is conveyed to audiences in a way that makes sense. Their job, apart from technical, also relies on creativity, since they must recreate the action, themes, and emotion of the narrative. In early cinema, their job was done by hand, cutting and putting together the film strip. However, nowadays it's done through editing software, which the editor must be familiar with. The first film that contained this work was Life of an American Fireman. The editor first must assemble an initial cut, which is later perfected into the final cut after presenting it to test audiences, to identify and fix the problems or inconsistencies. They work closely with the first assistant editor, who communicates with other departments like production, camera and sound, in order to leave the editor free to concentrate on editing the film. They check the footage and note any technical problems. They may be helped by several assistant editors who do simple cutting, editing, and sound syncing tasks. They also label the clips either by shot date or according to the script. This organization allows the editor to easily access what they need without wasting time tracking down a specific footage.
The colorist makes sure that the image looks the way it should, by matching the color palettes and the overall mood to the vision of the director or sometimes the director of photography. Their job relies on changing the luminance levels, that is, the brightness, or the chroma, the color, and they must ensure that the whole film maintains a coherent visual style, which is known as grading. Just like the editor, their role is as technical as it is creative, since they must be able to convey emotion through color. They usually work with softwares such as Baselight and DaVinci Studio. Now, let us focus on the visual effects department, which nowadays is becoming more important than ever. The visual effects supervisor is in charge of the whole visual effects project and supervises all the artists working on this process. They serve as the main link between the visual effects studio and the director or producer. They work on the project from the early stages of pre-production and are present for filming in order to make sure that the shots are suitable for the visual effects elements. They usually start working even while other parts of the movie are still being shot. ROTO artists are probably not paid enough, since they have one of the most painstaking jobs in the visual effects department. They have to manually trace the areas of the footage in order to separate the objects within the frame so that the compositor can apply effects or computer-generated images.
The matte painter's job arose along the digital age. They are tasked with creating hyperrealistic exteriors and interiors to use as background in scenes. This saves a lot of money and time in the production of the project, since instead of building an expensive set or a mock-up, they can just create it digitally, and even generate scenarios which would be impossible to recreate in real life. El Ranchito is a Madrid-based company which produces a lot of high-quality matte paintings internationally. The compositor uses the elements crafted by others in the department, such as the matte painting, the computer-generated images and overall effects, and combines them into a single image, ensuring that it looks like a final image. They must match all the effects coherently, and modify lighting or other aspects if needed to make it look seamless. They are the last hands the projects go through in the visual effects pipeline.
Lastly, we have the sound department, whose role usually goes overlooked since, when they do a good job, no one notices. The sound editor is the person in charge of the soundtrack aspect of the project, supervising the whole sound department. They are especially involved in creating the sound concept for the production and communicating the overall mood and aim of the soundtrack to other departments. They also ensure that the sound work remains on schedule. This is a terminology used in Hollywood, although there is another role often credited: the sound designer. The difference between a sound designer and a sound editor is quite difficult to define, but usually the sound editor focuses on the more technical aspects of the overall soundtrack, while the sound designer is credited as being in charge of the emotional aspects, so that the sounds convey the specific mood needed.
The dialogue editor must assemble the dialogue tracks and make sure that every word is clean and synchronized with the lip movement. Their workday is usually focused on erasing pops, clicks, adjusting levels, equalizing the voices, and modulating them to achieve the desired effects, for example, making a voice sound as if talking through a phone. They are in charge of locating issues with the dialogue sound. If that happens, they mark the dialogue for ADR, Automated Dialogue Replacement, which is the process of re-recording lines with the actors in a more controlled and quieter setting, usually in a studio. The re-recording mixer, who are called dubbing mixers in Europe, have a misleading name. They don't have to record anything and are not related with the ADR process. Rather, they mix the dialogue, music, and sound effects to create the final version of the soundtrack, making sure that the story is told effectively and impactfully through the sound. They use as a raw material the tracks already mixed by other sound engineers to create the final product, which need to comply with the audio guidelines provided by the director or by the sound designer. They work in two phases. First, an initial sound mix which is shown to test audiences, and then a final mix that fixes problems that may have gone unnoticed before. Their role is also a creative one in that they have to make decisions about the loudness of each sound in relation to one another. They are also the ones who include the laugh tracks, so love them or hate them, right?
The music supervisor oversees the creative, technical, and logistical aspects of both composing and implementing the music. They are involved in many departments. Besides being a sound editor, they must also work as a project manager, keeping many people updated and on track, and they must understand music in order to communicate effectively with the composer. They guide the music work from its conception to the final mix. They also attend initial spotting sessions, which are meetings where the director discusses all the sound elements. There, the music supervisor takes notes of the number of musical pieces, the placement, the tone, etc. The Foley artists recreate real-life sounds in the studio in order to match the action on screen. They first attend the spotting session where, after watching the footage, they take note of every single needed Foley effect. Their job is very creative since they must come up with ways to use objects that can fit in a studio to perfectly recreate the sound. They must devise and practice the sound effect, and then they record it while watching the live footage to time it accurately. When done correctly, their work goes unnoticed. Some of the ways they achieve realistic sound effects are the following. The sound effects editors are in charge of modifying, integrating, and sometimes creating sound effects. They draw from sound effect libraries, sounds created by Foley artists, and they might even go on the field to record sounds from real life. They also create what are called designed sounds, which are all the unnatural sounds that cannot be recorded from real life. They might be made by patching and modulating an already existing sound effect, or by synthesizing the sound from scratch.
And finally, the film is created. But wait, can we just broadcast it as it is? Well, this is when the online editor comes into play. They are in charge of the last step of post-production, since they create the final, full-resolution product. They receive the finished video and audio files and edit them together in order to create a transmission-ready program, always keeping in mind the technical requirements of the medium of broadcast.
As we have seen, the post-production world involves many talented individuals who have to combine their skills so that every single detail is taken care of. It is thanks to their hard work that we can just sit, relax, and enjoy the show.